figure that out. So, whoop. We're just going to get right into it, shall we? I'm Lady Rain. This is the Reader's Nook, and we are on Part 1, Chapter 8. And if you'll remember, Part 1 is called The Ship in the Earth. And this is Chapter 8, Modifications. Part 1. He put Bobbi on the couch and went quickly to the telephone. He picked it up, meaning to dial 0, and asked the operator what number he should dial to get the nearest rescue unit. Bobbi needed a trip to Derry Home Hospital and right away. A breakdown, Gardner supposed, although in truth he was so tired and confused that he hardly knew what to think. Some kind of breakdown. Bobbi Anderson seemed like the last person in the world to go over the top, but apparently she had. Bobbi said something from the couch. Gardner didn't catch it at first. Bobbi's voice was little more than a harsh croak. What, Bobbi? Don't call anybody, Bobbi said. She managed a little more volume this time, but even that much effort seemed to nearly exhaust her. Her cheeks were flushed, the rest of her face waxen, and her eyes were as bright and feverish as blue gemstones. Diamonds or sapphires, perhaps. Don't, Guard. Not anybody. Anderson fell back against the couch, panting rapidly. Gardner hung up the telephone and went to her, alarmed. Bobbi needed a doctor, that was obvious, and Gardner meant to get her one. Right now, her agitation seemed more important. I'll stay right with you, he said, taking her hand. That's what's worrying you. God knows you've stuck with me through enough But Anderson had been shaking her head with mounting vehemence. Just need sleep, she whispered. Sleep and food in the morning. Mostly sleep. Haven't had any. 3 days, 4 maybe. Gardner looked at her shocked again. He put together what Bobbi had just said with the way she looked. What rocket have you been riding, and why? His mind added. Bennies, Reds. He thought of Coke and then rejected it. Bobbi could undoubtedly afford Coke if she wanted to, but Gardner didn't think even basing could keep a man or woman awake for 3 or 4 days and melt better than 30 pounds often. Gardner calculated the time since he had last seen Anderson. 3 weeks? No dope, Bobbi said. No drugs. Her eyes rolled and glittered. Spit drizzled helplessly from the corners of her mouth, and she sucked it back. For an instant, Gardner saw an expression in Bobbi's face he didn't like, one that scared him a little. It was an Annie expression, old and crafty. Then Bobbi's eyes slipped closed, revealing lids stained a delicate purplish color, total exhaustion. When she opened her eyes again, it was just Bobbi laying there, and Bobbi needed help. I'm going to phone for the rescue unit, Gardner said, getting up again. You look really unwell, but Bobbi's thin hand reached out and caught his wrist as Gardner turned to the phone. It held him with surprising strength. He looked back at Bobbi, and although she looked terribly exhausted and almost desperately wasted, that feverish glitter was gone from her eyes. Now her gaze was straight and clear and sane. You call anybody, she said, her voice still wavering a little, but almost normal. We're done being friends, Guard. I mean it. Call the rescue unit or Derry Home, even old Doc Warwick, town, and that's the end of the line for us. You'll never see the inside of my house again. The door will be closed to you. Gardner looked at Bobbi with mounting dismay and horror. If he could have persuaded himself in that moment that Bobbi was delirious, he would have gladly done so. She obviously wasn't. Bobbi, you... I know what you're saying, but she did. That was the horror of it. She was threatening to end their friendship if Gardner didn't do what she wanted, using their friendship as a club, first time in all the years Gardner had known her. And there was something else in Bobbi Anderson's eyes, the knowledge that her friendship was maybe the last thing on earth that Gardner valued. Would it make any difference if I told you how much you look like your sister, Bobbi? No, he saw in her face nothing would make any difference. Don't know how bad you look, he finished lamely. No, Anderson agreed. and a ghost of a smile surfaced on her face. I got an idea, though, believe me. Your face, better than any mirror. The guard, sleep is all I need. Sleep and... Her eyes slipped shut again. She opened them with an obvious effort. Breakfast, she finished. Sleep and breakfast. Bobbi, that isn't all you need. No. Bobbi's hand had not left Gardner's wrist, and now it tightened again. I need you. I called for you, and you heard, didn't you? Yes, Gardner said uncomfortably. I guess I did. Guard. Bobbi's voice slipped off. Guard waited, his mind in turmoil. Bobbi needed medical help. But what she had said about ending their friendship if Gardner called anyone. The soft kiss she put in the middle of his dirty palm surprised him. He looked at her, startled, and looked at her huge eyes. Fevered glitter had left them. All he saw in them now was pleading. Wait until tomorrow, Bobbi said. If I'm not better tomorrow, 1,000 times better, I'll go. All right? Bobbi, all right? The hand tightened, demanding Gardner say it was. Oh, I guess. Promise me. I promise. Maybe, Gardner added mentally, if you don't go to sleep and then start to breathe funny. I don't come over and check you around midnight. See your lips look like you've been eating blueberries. You don't pitch a fit. This was silly, dangerous, cowardly, but most of all just silly. He had come out of a big black tornado convinced that killing himself would be the best way to end all of his misery and ensure that he had caused no more misery in others. He had meant to do it. He knew that was so. He had been on the edge of jumping into that cold water. Then his conviction that Bobbi was in trouble, I called and you heard, didn't you, had come, and he was here. Now, ladies and gentlemen, he seemed to hear Alan Ludden saying in his quick, light quizmaster's voice. Here is your toss-up question. 10 points if you can tell me why Jim Gardner cares about Bobbi Anderson's threat to end their friendship, when Gardner himself means to end it by committing suicide. What, no one? Well, here's a surprise. I don't know either. Okay, Bobbi was saying. Okay, great. The agitation, which was nearly... Yeah, I am not sure. I was actually looking for a reading section, a reading category, but haven't found one yet. And I do chit chat every so often. Reminds me, I forgot to put up my thing. But it's not just reading. Every now and then we talk about other things. So I'll figure it out. Yep. The agitation, which was nearly terror, slipped away. Fast grasp, her breath slowed, and some of the color faded from her cheeks. So the promise had been worth saying, at least. Sleep, Bobbi. He would sit up and watch for any change. He was tired, but he could drink coffee and maybe take one or two of whatever Bobbi'd been taking, if he came across them. He owed Bobbi a night's watching. There were nights when she had watched over him. Sleep now. He gently disengaged his wrist from Bobbi's hand. Her eyes closed and slowly opened one last time. She smiled. A smile so sweet. He was in love with her again. She had that power over him. Just like old times, Guard. Yeah, Bobbi, like old times. Love you. I love you too. Sleep. Her breathing deepened. Guard sat beside her for 3 minutes, then 5, watching that Madonna smile, becoming more and more convinced he was asleep. Very slowly, Bobbi's eyes struggled open again. Fabulous, she whispered. What? Garner leaned forward. He wasn't sure what she'd said. What it is. What it can do. What it will do. She was talking in her sleep, Guard thought. But he felt a recurrence of the chill. That crafty expression was back in Bobbi's face. Not on it, but in it, as if it had grown under the skin. You should have found it. I think it was for you, guard. What was? Look around the place, Bobbi said. Her voice was fading. You'll see. We'll finish digging it up together. You'll see it solves the problems. All the problems. Gardner had to lean forward now to hear anything. What does, Bobbi? Look around the place, Bobbi repeated, and the last words drew out, deepening to become a snore. She was asleep. Part 2. Gardner almost went to the phone again. It was close. What? Really? Are you serious? I've been reading, 10 minutes and now you want to go? Why? Why do you wait till now? You're going to beat me up? Seriously? Huh? What? You want attention? You say hi? Say hi to everybody? What do you need? What are you guys doing? Part 2. Gardner almost went to the phone again. It was close. He got up. Halfway across the room, he diverted, going to Bobbi's rocking chair instead. He would watch for a while first, he thought. Watch for a while and try to think what all this might mean. He swallowed and winced at the pain in his throat. He was feverish, and he suspected the fever was no little 1-degree job either. He felt more than unwell. He felt unreal. Fabulous. What it is, what it can do. He would sit here for a while and think some more. Then he would make a pot of strong coffee and dump about 6 aspirin into it. That would take care of the aches and fever, at least temporarily. Might help keep him awake, too. What it will do. Bard closed his eyes, dozing himself. That was okay. He might doze, but not for long. He'd never been able to sleep sitting up. Peter was apt to appear at any time. He would see his old friend Guard jump into his lap and get his balls. Always. When it came to jumping into the chair with you and getting your balls, Peter never failed. Hell of an alarm clock. You happen to be sleeping. 5 minutes, that's all. 40 winks. No harm, no foul. You should have found it. I think it was for you, Guard. He drifted, and his doze quickly deepened into a sleep so deep it was close to coma. Part 3 is what we're going to be on. Give me a few minutes. I got to take the dogs out. She's decided she needs out right as I start reading. So I will be right back. Give me 5 minutes. And yes, I will look into podcasts, by the way. Come on, girls. leaving for today? Can I? You guys gonna let me finish? I hope so. All right, I am back. Let's continue. Part 3. Shush. He's looking down at his skis, plain brown wood strips racing over the snow, hypnotized by their liquid speed. He doesn't realize this state of near hypnosis until a voice on his left says, "One thing you bastards never remember to mention to your fucking communist anti-power rallies at your rallies is just this. In 30 years of peaceful nuclear power development, we've never been caught once." Ted is wearing a reindeer sweater and faded jeans. The skis fast and well. Gardner, on the other hand, is completely out of control. "You're gonna crash," a voice on his right says. He looks over, and it's Argle-Bargle. Argle-Bargle has begun to rot. Fat face, which has been flushed with alcohol on the night of the party, is now the yellow-gray of old curtains hanging in dirty windows. His flesh has begun to slough downward, pulling and splitting. Argle-Bargle sees shock and terror. Gray lips spread in a grin. "That's right," he says. "I'm dead. It really was a heart attack. Not indigestion, not my gallbladder. I collapsed 5 minutes after you were gone. They called an ambulance. The kid I hired to tend the bar got my heart started again with CPR. But I died for good in the ambulance." The grin stretches. Becomes as moony as the grin of a dead trout lying on the desert beach of a poisoned lake. "Phoebe, get out of there." "I died at a spotlight on Storrow Drive," Argle-Bargle says. "No," Gardner whispers this. This is what he has always feared, the final, irrevocable, drunken act. "Yes," the dead man insists, as they speed down the hill, drifting closer to the trees. "I invited you to my house, gave you food and drink, and you repaid me by killing me in a drunken argument. Please, You what? You what?" From his left again, the reindeer on Ted's sweater have disappeared. They've been replaced by yellow radiation warning symbols. "You nothing, that's what. Where do you Latter-day Luddites think all that power comes from?" "You killed me," Arberg drones from his right. "But you'll pay. You're going to crash, Gardner." "Do you think we get it from the Wizard of Oz?" Ted screams. Weeping sores suddenly erupt from on his face. His lips bubble, peel, crack, and begin to suppurate. One of his eyes shimmers into the milkiness of cataract. Gardner realizes with mounting horror, that he is looking into the face of exhibiting symptoms of a man in his last advanced stages of radiation sickness. The radiation symbols on Ted's shirt are turning black. "You'll crash, you bet," Argle-Bargle drones on. "Crash." He is weeping with terror now, as he wept after shooting his wife, hearing the unbelievable report of the gun in his hand, watching as she staggered backward against the kitchen counter. One hand clapped on to her cheek like a woman uttering a shocked, "My land, I never!" Then the blood squirting through her fingers, and his mind, in the last desperate effort to deny it all, had thought, "Ketchup, but relax, that's just ketchup," then beginning to weep, as he was now. "As far as you guys are concerned, all your responsibility ends at the wall plate where you plug in." Pus rains and dribbles down Ted's face. His hair has fallen out. The sores cover his skull. His mouth spreads in a grin as moony as Arberg's. Now, in a last extremity of terror, Gardner realizes he is skiing out of control, down Straight Arrow, flanked by dead men. "But you'll never stop us, you know. No one will. The pile is out of control, you see. Has been since, around 1939, I'd reckon. We reached critical mass along about 1965. Out of control. The explosion will come soon. No, no. You've been riding high, but those who ride highest fall hardest, Arberg drones. Murder is the host of a host is the foulest murder of all. You're going to crash. 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 How true is it? How true it is. He tries to turn, but his skis remain stubbornly on course. Now he can see the hoary old pine. Argle Bargle and Ted, the power man, are gone, and he thinks, were they Tommyknockers, Bobbi? He can see a red swatch of paint around the pine's gnarly trunk, and then it begins to flake and split. As he slides helplessly toward the tree, he sees that it has come alive, that it has split open to swallow him. The yawning tree grows and swells, seems to rush toward him, grows tentacles, and there is a horrible rotten blackness in its center, with red paint around it, like the lipstick of some sinister horror. And he can hear dark winds howling in the black, squirming mouth and Part 4. He doesn't wake up then. As much as it seems he has, everyone knows that even the most outlandish dreams feel real, that they even have their own spurious logic, that this is not real, cannot be. He has simply exchanged one dream for another. Happens all the time. In this dream, he has been dreaming about his old skiing accident for the second time that day. Can you believe it? Only this time the tree he struck, the one which almost killed him, grows a rotted mouth like a squirming knothole. He snaps awake and finds himself sitting in Bobbi's rocking chair, too relieved by simple waking to care if he's stiffed all over and that his throat is now so sore that it feels like it's been lined with barbed wire. He thinks, I'm going to get up and make myself a dose of coffee and aspirin. Wasn't I going to do that before? He starts to get up. That's when Bobbi opens her eyes. It's also when he knows he is dreaming. Must be, because green rays of light shoot from Bobbi's eyes. Gardner is reminded of Superman's X-ray vision in the comic books. The way the artist drew it in lime-colored beams. But the light which comes from Bobbi's eyes is swamp-like, somehow dreadful. There is something rotted about it, like the drifting glow of St. Elmo's fire in a swamp on a hot night. I love it, don't you? Men's section. I love looking over there for shirts. One of my favorites. I actually had to sew a piece because it had a hole in it and showed bits that it shouldn't have showed. So I sewed it up. But you can't tell. The nice part. I have 2 Jaws shirts. The other one's gray. Bobbi sits up slowly and looks around. Looks toward Gardner. He tries to tell her no. Please don't put that light on me. No words come out, and as that green light hits him, he sees that Bobbi's eyes are blazing with it. As its source, it is as green as emeralds at its source, as bright as sunfire. He cannot look at it, has to avert his eyes. He tries to bring an arm up to shield his face, but he can't. His arm is too heavy. It'll burn, he thinks. It'll burn, and then in a few days, the first sores will show up. You'll think they're pimples at first, because that's what radiation sickness looks like when it starts. Just a bunch of pimples. Only these pimples never heal. They never get worse. They only get worse and worse. He hears Arberg's voice, a disembodied holdover from the previous dream. And now there seems to be a triumph in his drone. I knew you were going to crash, Gardner. A light touches him, watches over him, even with his eyes squeezed shut. It lights the darkness as green as radium watch dials. But there's no real pain in dreams, and there is none here. The bright green light is neither hot nor cold. It is nothing except his throat. His throat is no longer sore, and he hears this clearly and unmistakably. % off. This is the sort of price reduction that may never be repeated. Everyone gets credit. Recliners, waterbeds, living rooms. The plate in his skull talking again. Gone almost before It was fairly begun. Like his sore throat. And the green light has gone too. Gardner opens his eyes cautiously. Bobbi is laying on the couch, eyes shut, deeply asleep, just as she was. What's all this about rays shooting out of eyes? Good God. He sits in the rocking chair again, swallows, no pain. The fever has gone down a lot too. Coffee and aspirin, he thinks. You were going to get up for coffee and aspirin, remember? Sure, he thinks, settling more comfortably into the rocking chair and closing his eyes. But no one gets coffee and aspirin in a dream. I'll do it just as soon as I wake up. Guard, you are awake. But that, of course, could not be. In the waking world, people don't shoot green beams from their eyes. Beams that cure fevers and sore throats. Dreams see, reality no. He crosses his arms over his chest and drifts away. He knows no more, either sleeping or waking, for the rest of that night. Part 5. When Gardner woke up, bright light was streaming into his face through the western window. His back hurt like a bastard, and when he stood, his neck gave a wretched, arthritic creak that made him wince. It was 9:15. He looked at Bobbi and felt a moment of suffocating fear. In that moment, he was sure Bobbi was dead. Then he saw she was just so deeply, movelessly asleep that she gave no impression of being dead. It was a mistake anyone might have made. Bobbi's chest rose in slow, steady pulls, with long but even pauses in between. Gardner timed her and saw she was breathing no more than 6 times a minute. She looked better this morning. Not great, but better than the haggard scarecrow he had reeled out to greet than the haggard scarecrow who had reeled out to greet him last night. Doubt if I looked much better, he thought, and went to Bobbi's bathroom to shave. The face looking back from the mirror wasn't as bad as he had feared, but he noted with some dismay that his nosebleed bled again in the night. Not a lot, but enough to have covered his philtrum and most of his upper lip. He got a face cloth out of the cupboard to the right of the sink and turned on the hot water to wet it down. He put the face cloth under the water flowing from the hot tap with all the absent-mindedness of long habit. With Bobbi's water heater, you just had time for a cup of coffee and a smoke before you got a lukewarm stream. And that was on a good ouch! He pulled his hand back from water so hot it was steaming. Okay, that was what he got for assuming Bobbi was just going to go clip-clopping down the road of life without even getting her damned water heater fixed. Gardner put his scalded palm in his mouth and looked at the water coming out of the tap. It had already fogged the lower edge of the shaving mirror on the back of the medicine cabinet. He reached out, found the tap's handle almost too hot to touch, and used the face cloth to turn it off. Then he put in the rubber plug, drew a little more hot water cautiously, and added a generous dollop of cold. The pad of flesh below his thumb had reddened a little. He opened the medicine cabinet and moved things around until he came to the prescription bottle of Valium with his own name on the label. If that stuff improves with age, it ought to be great, he thought. Still almost full. Well, what did he expect? Whatever Bobbi had been using, sure as hell had been the opposite of Valium. Gardner didn't want it either. He wanted what was behind it. If it was still... success! He pulled out a double-edged razor, and a packet of blades. He looked a little sadly at the layer of dust on the razor. It had been a long time since he'd shaved in the morning here at Bobbi's, and then rinsed it off. At least she didn't throw it out, he thought. That would have been worse than the dust. A shave made him feel better. He concentrated on it, drawing it out while his thoughts ran their own course. He finished, replaced the shaving stuff behind the Valium, and cleaned up. Then he looked thoughtfully at the tap with the H on its handle and decided to go down cellar and see what sort of magnificent water heater Bobbi had put in. The only thing to do was watch Bobbi sleep, which she seemed to do well on her own. He crossed into the kitchen thinking that he really did feel well, especially now that the aches from the night in Bobbi's rocking chair were starting to work out of his back and neck. "You're the guy who's never been able to sleep sitting up, right?" He jeered softly at himself. "Crashing out on breakwaters is more your style, right?" But this ribbing was nothing like the harsh, barely coherent self-mockery of the day before. The one thing he always forgot in the grip of the hangovers and the terrible post-jag depressions was the feeling of regeneration that sometimes came later. You could wake up one day realizing you hadn't put any poison in your system the night before, the week before, maybe the whole month before, and you felt really good. As for what he had been afraid most must be the onset of the flu, maybe even pneumonia, that was gone too. No sore throat, no plugged nose, no fever. God knew he had been a perfect target for the germ after 8 days of drinking, sleeping rough. Finally, hitch him back to Maine in his bare feet during a rainstorm. It had passed off in the night. Sometimes God was good. He paused in the middle of the kitchen, his smile drifting away into the momentary expression that was puzzled and a little disquieted. Fragment of his dream or dreams came slipping back. Radio ads in the night. Does that have something to do with feeling well this morning? And then it faded again. He dismissed it, content with the fact that he felt well and Bobbi looked well. Better anyway. Bobbi wasn't awake by 10 o'clock, 10:30 at the latest. He would wake her up. Bobbi felt better and spoke rationally. Fine. They could discuss whatever had happened to her. Something sure did, Gardner thought, and wondered absently if she had gotten some terrible news report from home, a bulletin that would undoubtedly have been served up by Sister Anne. They would go on from there. She still even slightly resembled the spaced-out, rather creepy Bobbi Anderson, who had greeted him the night before. I hate when t-shirts dig in my neck, drives me nuts. Gardner was going to call the doctor whether Bobbi liked it or not. He opened the cellar door and fumbled for the old-fashioned toggle switch on the wall. He found it. The switch was the same. The light wasn't. Instead of the feeble flow from two 60-watt bulbs, the only illumination in Bobbi's cellar since time out of mind, the cellar lit up with a brisk white glare. It looked as bright as the discount department store down there. Gardner started down, hand reaching for the rickety old banister. He found a thick, solid new one. It was held firmly against the wall with new brass fittings. Some of the stair treads, which had been definitely queasy, had also been replaced. Gardner reached the bottom of the steps and stood looking around. His surprise now bordering on the stronger emotion. He was almost shocked. That slightly moldy root cellar smell was gone too. She looked like a woman running on empty, no joke. Right out on the ragged edge. She couldn't even remember how many days it had been since she'd gotten any sleep. No wonder. I've heard of home improvement. This is ridiculous. She couldn't have done it all by herself, though, could she? Of course not. But Gardner suspected that, somehow, Bobbi had. If Gardner had awakened here instead of on the breakwater in Arcadia Point, with no memory of the immediate past, he wouldn't have known he was in Bobbi's cellar, although he had been here countless times before. The only reason he was sure of it now was because he had gotten here from Bobbi's kitchen. That rooty smell wasn't entirely gone, but it was diminished. The cellar's dirt floor had been neatly raked. No, not just raked, Gardner saw. Cellar dirt got old and sour after a while. You had to do something about it if you planned to be spending much time below ground. Anderson had apparently brought in a fresh load of dirt and had spread it around to dry before raking. Gardner supposed that was what sweetened the atmosphere of the place. Fluorescents were racked in overhead rows. Each hooded fixture hung from the old beams by chains and more brass fittings. They shed an even white glow. All the fixtures were single tubes except for those over the work table. Those each had a pair, so here the glow was so bright that it made Gardner think of operating theaters. He walked over to Bobbi's work table, Bobbi's new work table. Anderson had an ordinary kitchen table cover with dirty contact paper before. It had been lit with the gooseneck study lamp and littered with a few tools, most of them not in very good condition, and a few plastic boxes of nails, screws, bolts, and the like. It was a small workplace of a woman who is neither very good nor very interested in small repairs. The old kitchen table was gone, replaced by 3 long, light tables, the sort of which bake sale goods are placed at church sales. They had been placed end to end along the left side of the cellar to make one long table. It was littered with hardware, tools, spools of insulated wire, both thin and thick, coffee cans full of brads and staples and fasteners, dozens of other items, or hundreds. But there were batteries. And then there were batteries. There was a carton of them under the table, a huge loose collection of long life batteries, still in their blister packs. C cells, B cells, AA's, AAA's, 9 volts. Must be $200 worth in here, Gardner thought. More rolling around on the table. What in the blue hell? Dazed, he walked along the table like a man checking out the merchandise and deciding whether or not to buy. It looked as though Bobbi was making several different things at once, and Gardner was not sure what many of them were. Here, standing halfway along the table, was a large square box with its front panel split aside to reveal 18 different buttons. Beside each button was the title of a popular song. Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head, New York, Laura's Theme, and so on. Next to it, an instruction sheet tacked neatly to the table identified it as the one and only silver chime digital doorbell made in Taiwan. Gardner couldn't imagine why Bobbi would want a doorbell with a built-in microchip that would allow the user to program a different song whenever she wanted to. Did she think Joe Paulson would dig hearing Laura's theme when he had to come to the door with a package? That wasn't all. Gardner could at least have understood the use of the silver chime digital doorbell, if not Bobbi's motivation in installing one. But she seemed to be in the process of modifying the thing somehow, hooking it, in fact, into the workings of a boombox radio the size of a small suitcase. 6 wires, 4 thin, 2 moderately thick, snaked between the radio, its instruction sheet also tacked neatly to the table, and the opened gut of the silver chime. Gardner looked at this for some time and then passed on. Breakdown. She's had a very odd sort of mental breakdown. The kind Pat Summerall would love. Here was something else he recognized. A furnace accessory called a rebreather. You attached it to the flue, and it was supposed to recirculate some of the heat that had ordinarily got wasted. It was the sort of gadget Bobbi would see in a catalog. Please feed the cats! Or maybe in the Augusta Trustworthy Hardware store and talk about buying. She never actually would, though, because if she bought it, she would have to install it. But now she apparently had bought it and installed it. You could say she's having a breakdown and that's all, because when someone who's really creative high-sides it, it's rarely a case of that's all. Crack-ups are never pretty. But when someone like Bobbi tips over, it can be sort of amazing. Just look at this shit. Do you believe that? Yeah, I do. I don't mean that creative people are somehow finer or more sensitive, and thus have finer, more sensitive nervous breakdowns. You can save that horse shit for the Sylvia Plath worshippers. It's just that creative people have creative breakdowns. If you don't believe it, I repeat, look at this shit. Over there was the water heater, a white cylindrical bulk to the right of the root cellar door. It looked the same, but Gardner went over, wanting to see how Bobbi had souped it up so radically. She'd gone on a mad home improvement kick, and the nuttiest thing is that she doesn't seem to have differentiated between things like fixing the water heater and customizing doorbells. New banister, fresh dirt brought in and raked over the floor of the root cellar. Christ knows what else. No wonder she's exhausted. Just by the by, Bard, where did Bobbi come by the know-how to do all this stuff? If it was a correspondence course from Popular Mechanics, she must have really crammed. His first dazed surprise, coming on this nutty workshop in Bobbi's basement, was becoming deepening unease. It wasn't just the evidences of obsessive behavior that he saw along the table. Heaps of equipment, too neatly organized, all four corners of the instruction sheets tacked down. That bothered him. Nor was it the evidence of mania in Bobbi's apparent failure to discriminate between worthwhile renovations and apparently nonsensical Gardner amended ones. What gave Gardner the creeps was looking about, trying to think about the huge and profligate amounts of energy that had been expanded here. To have done just those things he had seen so far, Bobbi must have blazed like a torch. There were projects like the fluorescent lights, which had already been completed. There were the ones still pending. There were the trips to Augusta she must have needed to get all the equipment, hardware, and batteries. Plus, getting sweet dirt to replace the sour. Don't forget that. What could have driven her to it? Gardner didn't know, but he didn't like to imagine Bobbi here, racing back and forth, working on 2 different do-it-yourself projects at once, or 5 or 10. The image was clear. Bobbi with the sleeves of her shirt rolled up and the top 3 buttons undone, beads of sweat trickling down between her small breasts, her hair pulled back in a rough horsetail, eyes burning, face pale except for 2 hectic red patches, one in each cheek. Bobbi looking like Mrs. Wizard gone insane, growing more haggard as she screwed screws, bolted bolts, soldered wire, trucked in dirt, and stood on her stepladder, bent backward like a ballet dancer, sweat running down her face, cord standing out in her neck as she hung up the new lights. Oh, and while you're at it, don't forget Bobbi putting in the new wiring and fixing the hot water tank. Gardner touched the tank's enamel side and pulled his hand back fast. It looked the same, but it wasn't. It was hot as hell. He squatted and opened the hatch of the bottom of the tank. That was when Gardner really sailed off the edge of the world. Part 6. Yeah, we only have a few pages left. Before, the water heater had run on LP gas, the small bore copper tubes which fed the gas to the tank's burner. Probably the feet of the dogs. Tank's burner ran from tanks in the hookup behind the house. The delivery truck from Dead River. Hold on, I'll be right back. Hey, Doug, just put Well, we had an accident we had to deal with.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Not sure why, but we did. Part 6. Before, the water heater had run on LP gas. The small bore copper tubes which fed gas to the tank burner ran from tanks in the hookup behind the house. The delivery truck from Dead River Gas and Dairy came once a month and replaced the tanks if they needed replacing. Close the door, please. Usually they did, because the tank was wasteful as well as inefficient. Two things that went together more often than not, now that Gard thought about it. The first thing Gardner noticed was that the copper tubes were no longer hooked into the tank. They hung free behind it, their ends stuffed with cloth. Holy shit, how's she heating her water? He thought. And then he did look into the hatch. And then, for a little while, he froze completely. His mind seemed clear enough, yes, but that disconnected, floating sensation had come back. That feeling of separation. Old Gard was going up again, up like a child's silver puffer balloon. He knew he felt afraid, but this knowledge was dim, hardly important, compared to that dismal feeling of coming untethered from himself. No, Gard, Jesus, a mournful voice cried from deep inside him. He remembered going to the Freiburg Fair when he was a little kid, no more than 10. He went into the mirror maze with his mother, and the two of them had gotten separated. That was the first time he had felt this odd sensation of separation from self, of drifting away, of above his physical body and his physical, if there was such a thing, mind. I got the hiccups, great. He could see his mother, oh yes, 5 mothers, a dozen, 100 mothers, some sort, some tall, some short, some tall, some fat, some scrawny. At the same time, he saw 5, a dozen, 100 guards. Sometimes he'd see one of his reflections join one of hers, and he would touch out, almost absently, expecting to touch her slacks. Instead, there was only empty air and another mirror. He had wandered for a long time, and he supposed he had panicked, but it hadn't felt like panic. And so far as he could remember, no one had acted like he had been in a panic when he finally floundered his way out. This only after 15 minutes of twisting, turning, doubling back, and running into barriers of clear glass. His mother's brow had furrowed slightly for a moment, then cleared. That was all. But he had felt panic, just as he was feeling it now. That sensation of feeling your mouth coming unbolted from itself, like a piece of machinery falling apart in zero G.
Whose tea is this?
Mine. Put it on the counter. It comes, but it goes. Wait, Gard. Just wait for it to be over. He squatted on his hunkers, looking into the open hatch at the base of Anderson's water tank, and waited for it to be over, as he had once waited for his feet to lead him down the correct passage and out of that terrible mirror maze at the Freiburg Fair. The removal of the gas ring had left a round, hollow area at the base of the tank. This area had been filled with a wild tangle of wires, red, green, blue, and yellow. In the center of the tangle was a cardboard egg carton, Hillcrest Farms. The blue printing read, Grade A Jumbo. Sitting in each of the egg cradles was an ever-ready alkaline D-cell battery, plus terminals up. A tiny funnel-shaped gadget cupped the terminals, and all of the wires seemed to either start or end at in these caps. As he looked longer in a state that did not precisely feel like panic, Gardner saw that his original impression, the wires were in a wild jumble, was no more true than his original impression that the stuff on Bobby's work table was in a litter. No. There was order in the way the wires came out of or went into those 12 funnel-shaped caps. As few as 2 wires coming in and going out of some, as many as 6 coming in and going out of others. There was even order in the shape they made. It was a small arch. Some of the wires bent back into the funnels capped over other batteries, but most went to circuit boards propped against the sides of the water tank's heating compartment. They were from electric toys made in Korea, Gardner surmised. Too much cheap silvery solder and corrugated fiber ward. A weird gyro, gear loose, conglomeration, if ever there had been one. This weird conglomeration of components was doing something. Oh, yes, it was heating the water fast enough to raise blisters, for one thing. In the center of the compartment, directly over the egg carton, in the arch formed by the wires, glowed a bright ball of light, no larger than a quarter, but seemingly as bright as the sun. Gardner had automatically put his fist up to block out the savage glow, which shone out of the hatch, a solid white bar of light that cast a shadow long behind him on the dirt floor. He could look at it only by wincing his eyes down to the barest slits and then opening his fingers a little, bright as the sun. Yes, only instead of yellow, it was a dazzling bluish white, like a sapphire. It glowed, pulsated, and shifted slightly, then remained constant, then pulsated and shifted again, cycling. Where's the heat? Gardner thought. And that began to bring him back to himself. Where is the heat? He reached one hand up and laid it on the smooth enameled side of the tank again. But only for a second. He snatched it away, thinking of the way the water had smoked coming out of the tap in the bathroom. There was hot water in the tank, all right, plenty of it. By all rights, it should boil away to steam and blow Bobbi Anderson's tank all over the basement. It wasn't doing that, obviously. That was a mystery. But it was the minor mystery compared to the fact that he wasn't feeling any heat coming out of the hatch. None at all. He should have burned his fingers on the little knob he pulled to open the hatch. And when it was open, that coin-sized sun should have burned the skin right off his face. So, slowly, hesitantly, Gardner reached toward the opening with his left hand, keeping his right fisted before his eyes to block out the worst of the glow. His mouth was pulled down in a wince, and as he anticipated a burn, he splayed his fingers, slipped into the hatchway, and then struck something yielding. You all right? You okay? He thought later, get a drink of water. He thought later it was like a little like pushing your fingers into a stretched nylon stocking. Only this gave just so much and then stopped. Your fingers never punched through, as though they would have punched through a nylon stocking. But there was no barrier, none at least that he could see. He stopped pressing, and the inevitable membrane gently pushed his fingers back out of the hatchway. He looked at his fingers and saw they were shaking. A force field. Some sort of force field that damps heat. Dear God, I've walked into a science fiction story from Starling Stories. Right around 1947, I'd guess. I wonder if I made the cover. If I did, who drew me? Virgil Finlay? Hans Bach? His hand was beginning to shake harder. He groped for the little door, missed it, and found it again, and slammed it shut, cutting out the dazzling flood of white light. He lowered his right hand slowly, but he could still see an after image of that tiny sun, the way one could see a flashbulb after it had gone off in one's face. Only what Gardner saw was a large green fist floating in the air, bright, octoplasmic blue blue between the fingers. The afterimage faded. The shakes didn't. Gardner had never wanted to drink so badly in his life. Can you find my soda, please? Because I had it. Now it's my tea. I don't know where I put it. Can you see if you can find it, please? Is it on the counter?
No.
Is it under the desk?
Give me this mug.
No, it's a bottle of tea.
What color is it?
Lipton.
This thing?
No, it's Arizona. The one I got last night. Is it behind me?
Probably. Excuse me, honey.
I don't know. I have no idea. It went somewhere, though. No, I'll find it. Can you give me a glass of water? 7. He got one in Anderson's kitchen. Bobbi didn't drink much, but she kept fridge. But she kept what she called the staples in the cabinet behind the pots and pans. Bottle of gin, bottle of scotch, bottle of bourbon, bottle of vodka. Gardner pulled out the bourbon, some cut-rate brand, but beggars couldn't be choosers, and poured an inch into the plastic tumbler and drowned it. Thank you.
I kind of watch Netflix. Go on, guys.
No, he downed it. What?
I kind of watch TV. The TV.
You see this?
Yeah, I know.
Let me finish these pages, okay?
I cannot watch Netflix when
At 20 and no higher.
Netflix is being stupid.
If it's being stupid, we're gonna just cancel it.
But that which means I will lose the phone thing.
I don't know. Better watch your step, guard. You're tempting fate. Except he wasn't. Right now, he almost would have welcomed a jag. But the cyclone had gone somewhere else to blow, at least for the time being. He poured another 2 inches of whiskey into the glass, contemplated it for a moment, then poured most of it down the sink. He put the bottle back and added water and ice cubes, converting what had been liquid dynamite into a civilized drink. He thought the kid on the beach would have approved. He supposed the dreamlike calm that had surrounded him when he came out of the mirror maze and felt it now was a defense against just lying down on the floor and screaming until he lost consciousness. The calm was all right. What scared him was how fast his mind had gone to work trying to convince him that none of it was true, that he had hallucinated the whole thing. Incredibly, his mind was suggesting that what he had just seen when he opened the hatch in the heater's base was a very bright light bulb. 200 watts, say. It wasn't a light bulb, and it wasn't a hallucination. It was something like a sun, very small and hot and bright, floating in an arch of wires over an egg carton filled with D cells. Now you can go crazy if you want, or get Jesus, or get drunk. But you saw what you saw, and leave us not guiled the lily, all right? All right. He checked on Anderson and saw she was still sleeping like a stone. Gardner had decided to wake Bobbi up at 10:30 if she hadn't wakened on her own. He looked at his watch now, and was astonished to see it was 20 minutes past 9. He had been in the cellar much longer than he had thought. Thinking of the cellar, called up the surreal vision of that miniature sun hanging suspended in its arc of wires, glowing like a super hot tennis ball. And thinking about that brought back the unpleasant sense that his mind was uncoupling itself. He pushed it away. It didn't want to go. He pushed harder, telling himself he was simply not going to think about it anymore until Bobbi woke up, told him what was going on around here. He looked down at his arms and saw that he was sweating. Part 8. Gardner took his drink out back, where he found more evidence of Bobbi's almost supernatural burst of activity. Her Tomcat tractor was standing in front of a large shed to the left of the garden. Nothing unusual about that. It was where she most commonly left it when the weatherman said it wasn't going to be rained on. But even from 20 feet away, Gardner could see that Anderson had done something radical to the Tomcat's motor. No, no more. Forget this shit, Guard. Go home. There was nothing dreamy or discounted about that voice. It was harsh, vital with panic, scared dismay. For a moment, Gardner felt himself on the verge of giving into it, and then he thought what an abysmal betrayal that would be of Bobbi, of himself. The thought of Bobbi had kept him from killing himself yesterday. I got an itch. There we go. It's choking me, so I keep pulling it away. Then I get an itch, and then I hate this time of year. I really do. I woke up this morning to snow, and I was like, ugh. Woke up achy, couldn't hardly move, and now I'm just like, ugh. Got enough cheese there?
Yeah, I'm kind of to hold this, but this darn thing won't.
That's what the cover's for. The motor. He thought of Bobbi. The thought of Bobbi had kept him from killing himself yesterday. And by not killing himself, he thought he had kept her from doing the same thing. The Chinese had a proverb: if you save a life, you are responsible for it. But if Bobbi needed help, how was he supposed to give it? Didn't finding out begin with trying to find out just what had been going on out here? But you know who did all the work, don't you, Guard? He knocked back the last of the drink, set the empty glass on top of the back step, and walked toward the Tomcat. He was distantly aware of the crickets singing in the high grass. He wasn't drunk. Not squiffy, as far as he could tell. The booze seemed to have shot past his entire nervous system, gave it a miss, as the British said, like the leprechauns that made the shoes tap, tap, tappity tap. Cobbler slept. But Bobbi hadn't been sleeping, had she? Bobbi had been driven until she dropped, literally dropped, into Gardner's arms. Tap, tap, tappity tap, knock, knock, knockety knock, late last night, and the night before, Tommyknockers knocking at the door. Standing by the Tomcat, looking into the open engine compartment, Gardner didn't just shiver. He shuddered like a man dying of cold, his upper teeth biting into his lower lip, his face pale, his temples and forehead covered with sweat. They fixed the water heater in the Tomcat, too. That's lots of things the Tommyknockers do. The Tomcat was a small working vehicle, which would have been almost useless on a big spread, where farming was the main work. It was bigger than a riding lawnmower, smaller than the smallest tractor, deer, or farmall had ever made, but just right for someone who kept a garden that was a little too big to be called a plot. And that was the case here. Bobbi had a garden of about 1.5 acres, beans, cukes, peas, corn, radishes, and potatoes. No carrots, no cabbage, no zucchini, no squash. I don't grow what I don't like, she had told Gardner once. Life's too short. The Tomcat was fairly versatile. It had to be. Even a well-off gentleman farmer would have trouble justifying the purchase of a $2,500 mini tractor on the basis of a 1-acre garden. It could rototill, mow grass with one attachment, and cut hay with another. It could haul stuff over rough terrain. She used it as a skidder in the fall. And so far as Gardner knew, Bobbi had gotten stuck only once. And in the winter, she attached a snowblower unit and cleared her driveway in half an hour. It was plowed by a sturdy 4cc engine. Powered by a sturdy 4cc engine. Or had been. The engine was still in there. But now it was tarted up with the weirdest array of gadgets and attachments imaginable. Gardner found himself thinking of the doorbell radio thing on the table in Anderson's basement, and wondering if Bobbi meant to put it on the Tomcat soon. Maybe it was radar or something. Single bewildered bark of laughter escaped him. A mayonnaise jar jutted from one end of the engine. It was filled with a fluid too colorless to be gasoline, and screwed into the brass fitting on the engine head. Sitting on the cowling was something that would have looked more at home on a Chevy Nova or a Super Sport, the air scoop of a supercharger. The modest cab had been replaced with the scourged 4-barrel. Bobbi had to cut a hole through the cowling to make room for it. And there were wires everywhere, snaking in and out and up and down and all around, making connections that made absolutely no sense, at least not as far as Gardner could see. He looked at the Tomcat rudimentary instrument panel, started to look away, and then his gaze snapped back, his eyes widening. The Tomcat had a stick shift, and the gearing pattern had been printed on a square of metal bolt to the dashboard above the oil pressure gauge. Gardner had seen the square of metal often enough. He had driven the Tomcat frequently over the years. Before, it had always been first, second, neutral, third, fourth, reverse. Now, something new had been added, something which was just simple enough to be terrifying. 1, 2, neutral, 3, 4, rear, and up, with a circle around the word up. So it's an arrow. Now, you don't believe that, do you? I don't know. Come on, guard. Flying tractors? Give me a break. She's got a miniature sun in her hot water. Bullshit. I think it might have been a light bulb, a bright one, like a 200 watt. It was not a light bulb. Okay, all right, calm down. It just sounds like an ad for a really E.T. ripoff, that's all. You'll believe a tractor can fly. Shut up. Or John Deere phone home. How's that? He stood in Anderson's kitchen again, looking longingly at the cabinet where the booze was. He shifted his eyes away. It was not easy because they felt as if they had gained weight, and walked back into the living room. He saw that Bobbi had changed positions and that her respirations were moving along a bit more rapidly. First signs of waking up. Gardner glanced at his watch again and saw it was nearly 10 o'clock. He went over to the bookcase by Bobbi's desk, wanting to find something to read until she came around. Something that would take his mind off this whole business for a little while. What he saw on Bobbi's desk, beside the battered old typewriter, was in some ways the worst shock of all. Shocking enough, anyway, so that he barely noticed another change. A roll of perforated computer paper hung on the wall above, and behind the desk and the typewriter like a giant roll of paper towels. Part 9. The Buffalo Soldiers, a novel by Roberta Anderson. Gardner put the top sheet aside, face down, and saw his own name, or rather the nickname only he and Bobbi used, Regard, who's always there when I need him. Another shudder worked through him. He put the second sheet aside, face down on the first. Chapter 1. In those days, just before Kansas began to bleed, the buffalo were still plentiful on the plains. Plentiful enough, anyway, for poor men, white and Indian alike, to be buried in buffalo skins rather than in coffins. Once you got a taste of buffalo meat, you'll never want what come off'n a cow again, the old-timers said. And they must have believed what they said, because these hunters of the plains, these buffalo soldiers, seemed to exist in a world of hairy, humpbacked ghosts. All about them they carried the memory of the buffalo, the smell of the buffalo, the smell, yes, because many of them smeared buff-hello on their necks and faces and hands to keep the prairie sun from burning their back. They wore buffalo teeth in necklaces and sometimes in their ears. Their chaps were of buffalo hide, and more than one of the nomads carried a buffalo penis as a good luck charm or guarantee continued potency. Ghosts themselves follow herds that cross the short wire grass like the great clouds which cover the prairie with their shadows. The clouds remain, but the great herds are gone, and so are the buffalo soldiers, madmen from wastes that had as yet never known offense, men who had came striding out of nowhere and went striding back into that same place, men with buffalo hide moccasins on their feet and bones clicking around their necks, ghosts out of time, out of a place that existed just before the whole country began to bleed. Late in the afternoon of August 24th, 1848, Robert Howell, who would die at Gettysburg not quite 15 years later, made camp near a small stream or out along the Nebraska Panhandle, in that eerie section known as the Sand Hill Country. The stream was small, and the water smelled sweet enough. Gardner was 40 pages into the story and utterly absorbed when he heard Bobbi Anderson call sleepily, "Guard? Guard, are you still around?" "I'm here, Bobbi," he said, and stood up, dreading what would come next, and already half believing he had gone insane. That had to be it, of course. There could not be a tiny sun in the bottom of Bobbi's hot water tank, nor a new gear in her tomcat which suggested levitation. But it would have been easier for him to believe either of those things than to believe that Bobbi had written a 400-page novel called The Buffalo Soldiers in 3 weeks or so since Guard had last seen her. A novel that was, just incidentally, the best thing she'd ever written. Possible, yeah. Easier? Hell, saner to believe he had gone crazy. Simply leave it at that. If only he could. And tomorrow morning, we will continue with chapter 9. And I will look into podcasts and see if a podcast or a talk show might be good. I'll see what I can do for reading, okay? Since you suggested it. I've been trying to figure out something that would be better than just chatting. Because I don't chat a whole lot, but I do talk a little bit anyway. So we'll see how it goes. And we'll go from there as far as what it's going to be under. I guess it really doesn't matter much, but we'll figure it out. All right? I'm going to let y'all go. I got to head out and get my youngest and then go over and get my hubby. So it's going to be a fun next hour. They all both get off at the same time. So y'all follow if you haven't. I will talk to you later. Remember, I love you. Talk to you soon. Bye.